we're going to dive straight into the meat and potatoes of the conversation. I'm coming to you first, Alan. Early stage ACL rehab. I know this is a topic close to your heart, so we'll go there first. What data is guiding your process in the early stages of an ACL rehab?
Well, so the first thing is to kind of understand the whole early, middle, late stage, like what is actually early stage ACL rehab to me. And I break it down into like 4 kind of components: acute, early, mid, and late. And your acute stage is like your 0 to 2 weeks. It's like basically this is your just don't fuck it up stage, basically. All you're trying to do is make sure and prevent as much as you possibly can that no swelling happens, no infection happens. You're trying to minimize swelling, and you're trying, like, holy God, to try and get extension back, if you've had an ACL reconstruction, that is. And that should be pretty much your entire objective for the early stage. So from a data perspective, it's not as fancy as you might think. It's really, how's the athlete responding? How's the knee from a function perspective? And are you getting there with an extension and flexion, which is going to take a little longer? So that would be like the acute stage side of things. And is the athlete's pain declining, which you can just have a conversation with them. You could do a fancy questionnaire, but really it's probably just as good having a conversation with them. And then when we get down to like what I would deem as early stage, early stage to me is basically when we can get back in the gym and we can start loading again pretty early on. So these are like your strength and power variables. And if anybody's seen my Instagram or seen any of the training that I do, like, it's like a little tractor shed, but it's the most technological tractor shed you've ever seen in your life. Like there's implements and data and technology flying everywhere. So what I've tried to do is just break it down into the kind of things that I would look at to direct my process. So the first few things I'm looking at are isometric. So usually when you've done your knee, actual moving through range is a bit of a difficult scenario initially. So isometric work's a great way to start to be able to assess function and be able to assess force outputs. And like everything that I try and do, it's always got a kind of a speed lens to it. So I'll bias it a little bit towards acceleration, deceleration, or maximal velocity orientated testing. So short lever, deep range tests, such as single leg glute bridge testing on the force plates for acceleration. It might be long lever testing, isometric hamstring testing for upright running. And it might be mid-thigh pull information at different degrees of knee flexion to give us some more information on there. I'll try and look at it from an ankle, knee, and hip perspective. So I want to know peak outputs around the ankle from an iso, mid-thigh pull for the knee, and then I'll look at the hip from short and long lever. And then on top of that, I like to have a look, and this is moving kind of towards the later stages of early phase rehab. We'll probably be progressing to something that looks like K-box type work, so like eccentric overload. And I'll utilize the K meter, which is on the K-box, to give me like an eccentric peak power derivative. And I'll look at that over time using some variation of whether it's a bilateral initially and then a unilateral Bulgarian or whatever. And that's starting to give me some information in and around my strength diagnostics for eccentric component. And then I'll also look at, and this is a little bit of more of a novel one, I'll look at knee extensor strength using, I'll take the output unit and I'll put it on a leg extension. And I'll start looking at mean velocity. And what I've found over time is that mean velocity generated through that leg extension is so closely correlated to what you get from an iso-K. And really interestingly, and this is one for the coaches, I guess, is iso-Ks have got so much weight in the performance world. Like, the athletes are so stressed. The coaches are deeming whether it's appropriate to do anything thereafter based on this iso-K score. And actually the leg extension with the mean velocity gives you a really good indication of gradually chipping away at the difference in the symmetry before probably saying it's prudent to go towards the iso-K, which is going to be this, well, for me anyway, the start of your mid stage. And then your power derivatives are going to be really basic for me. So I look at single leg squat jump. I look at jump height, basically. You could look at impulse and the time it takes to generate that jump height, but I look more at the output. Single leg counter movement jump. I look at eccentric and concentric impulses, but really I care about MRSI. I care about the time it takes to generate the jump height, because I think that's more relevant to sporting actions. And then I'll look at, I've kind of come up with a little Y-cut test. So I'll take somebody's leg length, I'll move them directly backwards from the force plates and ask them to hop onto the force plate. And I've drawn a chalk line on the diagonal out of the force plate. And they're trying to jump with one leg, strike the force plate, and hop in the diagonal direction as far as they can. And I'll be looking at distance covered, but also contact time. And this is where the data side of things I think is important. The numbers are really cool, but actually I'm just watching how they do it. What's happening from a frontal plane perspective? What's happening from a center of mass height, knee flexion perspective? Are they pre-tensed and prepared for the force plate, etc.? And that'll give me a really nice indication of how prepared they are to start to move towards what's going to be change of direction, kind of work towards mid-stage. And then finally, I'll look at RSI and broad jump RSI. So distance covered in a repeat broad jump, but with contact time taken into consideration. So imagine a double broad jump or a hop. And I'm looking at the distance covered, so say 300 centimeters, divided by the contact time, so 300 milliseconds, and that'll give me an RSI broad jump score of 1. And I know that that's pretty average, that's pretty poor. And against the contralateral side, it's 1.6 or 1.7. And again, it just gives me a really nice indication of, I've got vertical vectors, I've got horizontal vectors. I understand how applicable and appropriate it is to move towards my acceleration training, given that test. And from there, I can start to round out a profile that's going to influence my bias of work into the kind of mid-stage past, usually about weeks 12 to 14 in the populations that I work with.
Love it,
so
Al.
that gives you a...
We got it. So any deviation from anything there, Jason, Nick? You want to dive in? Are you unmuted? But I'm coming to you anyway. Jason, anything to add in there? Anything different, similar?
Similarities. I think Alan brought up a couple good points in terms of like dividing the stages. So we look at it from like, so we have like 4 levels essentially, and we collab with our sports medicine group. So like there's that initial injury treatment, which is primary on like the sports med, the physios, in terms of just restoring range of motion, things like that, boxes we're checking off there. And then we go into level 2, which we deem as our return to activity, and then level 3, return to sport, and then level 4, return to competition. A lot of similar things there. Our biggest things, regardless of the stage that the athlete is in, is that we try to blend it as close together as how our performance coaches are testing and assessing athletes, whether it's a weekly counter movement jump or it's a monthly 1080 hop test. We try to blend as close as we can, as best as possible, the medical side and the performance side, because that's where there's historically, and this is I'm sure at a lot of places, there's sometimes a disconnect between medical and performance in terms of like what they're valuing from a KPI standpoint, regardless of the injury. But we've been trying to do a better job of blending more of our performance-based metrics into the medical side so that both are on the same page, or like where an athlete actually is, but then also too, it gives us a better idea of like having better opportunities for baseline pre-injury data, but then as well, like making more appropriate comparisons. If there are injuries, then we can compare historically and look at prospectively along the injury side. So a lot of similarities with and a lot of similar tests too, in terms of like vertical profiling, horizontal profiling based on the injury itself. And I can speak more on some of the ACL things, obviously, but just trying to capture as many neuromuscular qualities as possible for us usually gives us some good insight there.
Al, just to give context, you're obviously in the private sector here in the UK. How would, and very briefly, how would what you choose there in terms of testing differ if you were actually in a club? Would you have the ability to be able to do all that, or would you be, nah,
no way. Like, I've been in that club setting, and it's very usually you've got maybe if you're unlucky, 10 plus guys in your rehab group, and you're trying to test them all. And that's where, like what Jason's saying, the whole integration with the performance side of things, and the training is testing and testing is training, and how those marry up together is really important. Like, if your performance group values a CMJ as your weekly output measure or drop jump, then you've got to start to kind of move to align to that side of things. I think where the rehab coaches can maybe have an influence on the performance side of things is that they do have the luxury of a little bit more time with the athletes. So if they find something that they think is really pivotal in terms of performance, because rehab is just longer term progressive performance training, then that can sometimes seep its way into the performance environment if it has value, which is what's happened previously in my experience, which has been really beneficial. But yeah, the short answer is no, you can't do everything I just said in a team environment. It's too much.
Cool.
I guess I just add, am I the only physio from the three of us, or? Yeah,
I think so, mate.
Yeah, my clinical head is on, and I'm just thinking early, and Alan mentioned it, and everything's amazing in terms of the metrics and things. And yeah, the early phase, as Alan alluded to, just getting the range of movement and being quite pedantic about how you measure that on a daily basis, and having subjective stiffness scores, subjective pain scores, looking at, the circumference of the knee, looking at thigh bulk, and seeing that we're trying to get back to limb symmetry in terms of bulk, which is a crude measure of quad growth. But things like that I would add in and be, from my clinical side of things, very specific on, before we then look at progressing, strength markers or modes of, power output and things like that. But yeah, definitely would do everything that the guys were talking about.
Cool. Second point, coming back to you, Jason. So I'm guessing it's pretty round level 2 from your kind of structure of things, but return to running post ACL. What's guiding this process? So Alan's kind of gone for that early phase, and you're moving on slightly.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I learned when I was first integrating myself into Clemson, and kind of just the jargon in terms of like how our clinicians viewed return to running versus how I internally viewed return to running, was a little bit different at first, because our clinicians tended to view return to running as literally just getting on a treadmill or getting on like a boost and being able to run for like 5 to 10 minutes at a time. Whereas when I think of return to running, initially, it's like, okay, we're back onto the field. Like, we're starting to actually do more sports specific things. So I had to kind of learn a little bit about like the language and the thought process in terms of like the whole like return to the field, return to running, which is super valuable to me, because I can better understand like how our clinicians think and how I can translate information, things like that. For us, this would be like our level 3 is like the return to sport, is where like on field return to running, whereas like the treadmill boost supported type of running is like return to activity. So there's a little bit of nomenclature difference, but it's still very valuable to know that information. But anyways, for us, a lot of that is guided off of our GPS. So we use Catapult. I'm sure a lot of other organizations and teams use. The biggest thing for us, and I think what may be a little unique with my position compared to others, is that it's not just with the soccer club, or it's not just with any single sport. It's across multiple sports. So we could be dealing with lacrosse athletes, or soccer, or potentially even like a baseball, softball athlete, or some of like your maybe non-traditional high incidence of ACL sports. But big things for us is like, especially the field-based sports like your soccers, lacrosses, things like that, is so Catapult's really guiding a lot of that. And it's important for a couple reasons. One is that we have historical information on our athletes, whether it's position specific, sport specific, also to like match and game specific, because for us, like ACC men's and women's soccer, like those matches are where we see the most intense work rates, like our worst case scenario types of things. So from a return to running standpoint, like we're trying to gear our athletes towards like 2 match weeks against ACC competition. And we have that historical information to reference off of. But a few of the big things that we really look at is one, obviously like your total player load, like the catch-all, sum of acceleration, the mechanical workload. We look at some of our high speed and very high speed distance bands, like how much distance they're covering within those bands. And it's going to differ from like a women's lacrosse to like a men's soccer. It's going to vary slightly in terms of how we deem that. We also look at our high intense like A cells and D cells. So some of the stuff that you'll see from like Damian Harper in terms of like repetitive exposure to intense decelerations, like we look at that fairly heavily. And then going off of that, looking at some of our match and training like work rate data, because we're trying to get our athletes back to like these worst case scenarios, these 1 minute, 30-second time frames that we can go back and look at retrospectively from some of our game or training data to then better replicate what they're doing on the field. Yeah, so those are some of the real big like GPS type of metrics that we're guiding. Some of the other things that I'm also looking at and exploring as well. And this is some of the work from Damian Harper is his ADA tests that he's published quite a bit on, in terms of like eliciting a maximal deceleration. Also too, it's more of like a sterile type of test where like some of the things that you'll run into in looking at some of the deceleration data, like in a sport like soccer or even like lacrosse, baseball, softballs, like you'll get slide tackles and things like that overinflate these deceleration values. They make it a little tricky to try to look at retrospectively. So this is a test that it's isolated. We can try to elicit a maximal deceleration. We can also look at limb to limb as well. So I think it's a really good test. I'm still working on some pilot data with some of our crew here, but just trying to get more exposure to those high intense decelerations is where I think there's a lot of value when you're getting back onto the field. And then I say the other part of it, we don't tackle this as much necessarily, just time and resources just across Olympic sports, and just having exposure to all these different athletes. But something to consider if you do have the time and the resources, some of the more neurocognitive pieces, integrating that within the return to running or on the field. So just being able to better integrate some of these like sensory motor training adaptations, whether it's using like different technologies. This is like synaptic training glasses, different things like that for like a visual occlusion type of training. I think personally is pretty valuable if you do have, like I said, the time and the resources to do that, because that gets into the whole concept of some of these neurocognitive sensory motor adaptations that happen after the injury, but then trying to restore some of those functions post injuries. I see is a lot of value that they can also be pretty helpful on the field as well.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. Big question, Jason, just coming to you, and I'll get Al's take in a minute because I'm not quite sure if he does or he doesn't have access to GPS, but there are plenty of people on here that do, but there'll be also others that don't. How would you go about things if you didn't have that GPS data?
Honestly, the short and simplest answer is probably like a session RPE metric. Honestly, it's probably going to give you the best value there. And you can even go a little more deeper into like, and we collect a lot of like subjective wellness data as well daily with quite a bit of our athletes. And you can just gauge that. Honestly, it's like just having like, for us, it's super helpful across a lot of these different teams and athletes, because it allows myself and our performance coaches to have like an informal conversation with our athlete if we can't directly meet with 100 different athletes a day and have that conversation. So just some of your subjective measures, your SRPE, some of your daily wellness. If you really wanted to get into some of the more like, I guess, validated questionnaires from that standpoint, you could dive into that. But yeah, some of your subjective measures may even be more valid than some of your objective measures, just because there's a lot of data to suggest that a lot of these subjective patient-reported outcomes have a lot of good validity in terms of outcomes post-injury, things like that. So that would be where I'd start if you don't have access to the technology.
Do you have access to GPS, Al? If you don't,
I do. I'm lucky enough to have.
Perfect.
Yeah, I do. But old school wise, like the sessions are so if it's a long-term ACL rehab again, for example, the sessions are planned out. Like you're going to do, maybe it's a tempo day, maybe it's an extensive change of direction day, whatever. If you're not writing in pen, it's definitely in pencil, but you can definitely start to gauge and guide, kind of move towards, okay, here's roughly what I'm accumulating across a week. Here's how many axial decels I'm going to do. And one of the best ways I've found to manage that is just, if you're doing an acceleration session, and every single coach on planet Earth does their accelerations with a few 4 steps, maybe some 6 steps, and then the athletes just bleed out. Well, just add in a decel component into it, and all of a sudden you've got matching axial decel, which is often a very, there's a high disparity in those numbers. And I've always been conscious of that, I think, because somebody from England Rugby once told me that they found a correlation between the amount of decels that players were doing from a Premiership perspective was actually the biggest thing and the biggest gap that they saw when they went into international camp. And they attributed some of the fatigue and the neuromuscular fatigue and potentially even injury rates based off the fact that there wasn't nearly as much deceleration components in the domestic weekly training load as the international. So yeah, old school pen and paper and write down your reps would be if I didn't have my GPS.
Anything to add, Nick, before we come on to the?
I guess, I mean, just looking at ACLs, you're talking about, a long-term injury. And I always take the philosophy that it's a good opportunity for an MOT of sort of the whole athletic profile. And whilst you will isolate onto, triple extension and triple flexion and change of direction mechanics, then I always look at the calf capacity, the calf strength, the hip capacity, the hip strength, the glutes, which I know everyone else will be doing at the same time. But it's always a really good opportunity to get metrics and data on a sort of total MOT of the body, and then, address any issues that will make the athlete a better athlete at the outcome, as well as getting back from their ACL injury. So those are some of the things I would look at as well.
Perfect. Just a bit of a reminder, if anyone wants to ask a question, stick it in the Q&A chat box, guide it to whoever you want to answer it. Had one come through already, so we'll get to the 15 minutes at the end to get through them. So Nick, moving from ACLs to hamstrings, so bringing it back to the kind of data side of things, and maybe a whistle-stop tour of a typical hamstring injury, if there is such a thing, and where you would utilize data to help you guide you through the process.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, the structure is the same as Alan described. You've got your early, middle, and late stage, and your return to sport, and you can put an acute stage at the start, which will be hopefully a lot shorter than that ACL recovery phase in the acute phase. And then I also think the middle phase you can subdivide into different stages to move through, because rather than just having one middle phase. But in that early phase, similar kind of things, improving pain and swelling, length of pain on palpation is a metric to pick up on, getting back to active knee extension, passive straight leg raise, active straight leg raise. So getting full elongation of the hamstrings, getting back to a normal slump, all these kind of range of movement measures that you can use. Looking at, if there is some time out from a serious hamstring injury, then you will start looking at limb girth measurements as well, and just making sure we're not getting any atrophy as a result of, non-use. And then looking at capacities of other synergists that you can measure early, as I just mentioned with the ACL. So you can do calf capacity testing and address things like that, calf strength testing. You can do some lateral hip testing without aggravating the injury site, for example, in that early phase. So you can pick up some really nice data that will help you to build the athlete to be more robust. But then essentially looking at on-the-bed examination and just being able to be competent with bridging exercises. And in that early phase, I'm not looking at reps and sets, and it's just a competency of pain provocation, and can they achieve the target? Does that tell me that they can contract without pain? And then I can look at progressing and progressing them into running on the pitch. If they can walk without pain, for example, I'm more happy for them to start looking at jogging on the pitch if there are all the other aspects are looking good. And then we normally start with getting data on isometrics. So that could be the handheld dynamometer in some positions that you can, standardize within your organization. But there are good resources like Aspetar's hamstring protocol, where you can look at the way that Nicole van Dijk and the guys have done it. So handheld dynamometry is really nice. You've got your other devices like Kangatech and the ForceFrame if you want to look at fixed dynamometry, isometric testing in different positions, starting with shorter lever and progressing, along to longer lever where you're putting a little bit more strain on the tissue. Progressing through there, I mean, you're going to move up to doing some eccentric exercises. And my first data is the competency of the reps and sets and the load that they're able to achieve within the designed program. So if they're achieving that, then they're achieving the competency criteria, they can move forward. And then when they get to a certain aspect of being able to do a decent amount of load, and if you look at Jack Hickey's paper, this is a nice model for this. Then you think start them on the Nor board. It might be a supported Nordic, an assisted, but then when you want to get the actual data, you might get a good idea from the Nor board about where they're at in terms of their norm straight off, and then try and build them up to where their norm is, and if they need to be better than they were previously, then progressing that as well. So there's some key metrics there. You can look at other eccentric measures like the IKD, which sometimes comes into some rehab processes, looking at concentrics or eccentric maximum strength, but also looking at capacity. So the hamstring bridge test from Freckleton's published test, so on the 60 centimeter box, achieving about 30 of those, or at least over 25 is the sort of benchmark. A nice early test to clear, which is a concentric eccentric capacity test. And you can chuck that in with all your other capacity tests for other parts of the body. And then if we move on from our maximal eccentrics, what Alan was alluding to there on the K box with the K meter. That's a really nice way to, if you get K box RDLs, a nice way to get a power output on eccentric and concentric. It's a double leg exercise, so but equally so is a Nord board, although the Nord board will give you left and right. But it can give you an idea of them being able to generate a good level of power either against benchmarks, or you might have done the exercise with them previous to the injury and have some baseline data. So there's some nice stretch shortening cycle and rate of force development metrics there. And then using the force plates as well, if we talk about rate of force development, we can do the isometric testing. We can look at Alan McCall type testing on supine at 30 and 90 degrees at the knee. We can move into things like Manton-Lowry's 90-20 position standing, and a test that we've been developing in a kind of 70-30 position, which are a bit more akin to a terminal swing phase, and putting that hamstring in a more vulnerable position to be tested both for peak force initially, and then as you move through the process, you're looking at familiarization and rate of force development metrics from that as well. And these things will guide, for me, their progression on the pitch. When they can achieve those kind of metrics in the gym, then I'm happy for them to be running at a faster speed on the pitch and being progressed along in that way. And that will all be guided by the GPS. I think that's not everything, but that's a lot of it.
I may have missed it, but what's the kind of criteria for kicking you guys onto something like a Nord board with Nordics? Is there anything that triggers that?
Yeah, I mean, I do like the logical process of Jack Hickey's work, where we use the hamstring slider. We might use the 45-degree hip extension exercise or the Roman chair. We might, if not using that, maybe RDLs, and we look at volume and some load. So can they do 3 sets of 10 to 12 single leg hamstring sliders eccentric? And that gives us an impression that they'll cope with the normal. But also equally, like I say, we can link them up onto a Kaiser cable to support them in their first Nordic exposure, or a band. The Kaiser's nice because, again, it gives you some data. You can say they're at this number on the Kaiser in a supported Nordic. But I think the idea is not to be too fearful with your lower grade injuries. Exposed to eccentric loading early is important. Exposure to running on the pitch early is important, as long as it's done safe. And all this data and objectivity gives us confidence to advise that.
Jason, Al, anything to compliment, go against?
No, Nick,
Al?
what was the swing phase test you were talking about?
So, I mean, if you look at, there's a test by Manton-Lowry where they put them in 90 degrees at the hip, 20 degrees at the knee, and you stand against the wall and your heels on a forced X. There's a test that we have been using, firstly at Bournemouth and, taken to West Ham, but where you stand against the wall and do the same test, but we found that 70 and 30 was our better position. And that was based on some of the literature. There's a paper from Guaya Millet that shows some of those angles in a terminal swing phase. And also a bit of a mixture of getting people into a comfortable position. We found 90-20 was too out of range for most footballers. And it also just it takes some familiarization compared to a 90-90 position on the floor, like a McCall position. But I think it has some sensitivity because of it being out of range and a bit more vulnerable. So you pick up people with more problems easier, I think.
And the force plate's raised up. So
the force plate's on a box. Yeah, it's on there.
Okay, cool. All right, good enough. Thank you.
Sorry. Can't believe it. Jason, anything to add, or you all good?
I think I'm all good on that one.
Okay, sweet. Right, let's move on. Thanks, Nick. Back to you, Al. Coming to you for some more GPS chat. In a example of your choice, maybe we'll go back to the ACL side of things. Using GPS to guide rehab. I know Jason's given an extensive answer on that, and you chimed in as well. But anything else where you can describe to us how you use GPS?
Yeah. So the first thing is that because I use a speed-based approach, so basically we'll start drilling early in the rehab, and the first running, and again, it's quite interesting to hear Jason talk about the clinicians. Like the first running an athlete will do with me is like low-level drills, in the form of dribbles and scissors and all that kind of stuff. Up until they are past and this is the kind of mid-stage where they've passed their tempo running and they've got through my kind of end stage criteria is 2 sets of 8, 100 meters. I'll put the free laps out So the testing gates in the middle of the tempos, and I'll take a look at those reps and see what the decline of speed is over those reps. So it's almost like a fatigue test kind of. So are they fast? Are they repeatable? And up until they can do those extensive longer tempos and those shorter tempos, actually, I don't really use the GPS that much other than to understand their top speed. And alongside that side of things, they're going to be doing their top end speed and max velocity work. So they've probably attained that by month 4.5 to 5 if all's going well, and they're a good athlete. But then once we get out of that phase of this kind of speed-based approach, higher velocity drill-based approach running, then I'll move them into something called game sim. And game sim is basically just getting prepared for the game. It's like game fitness, but broken down. And the GPS is where I'll use it extensively. So I'll look at 3 different things. I'll look at, so the total distance that the athletes accumulated across the week. I'll look at the intensity within the total distance that they've done, broken into different zones. And then I'll look at the number of high intensity efforts that an athlete actually completes. And the big question that surrounds all of this is like, okay, well, where am I actually trying to get the athlete to? Because that's really important. Like, what's my end goal here? And that might be different if you're a domestic footballer, or it might be different if you're an international World Cup rugby player or field hockey player. But the process is the same. So I'll go through those: total distance, intensity, number of high intensity efforts. And once I'm at that stage, I'm looking at, okay, well, I know I've got about probably 6 to 8 weeks here to get this person fit and ready for gameplay, or at least to drop into training at a fairly high intensity level. So from there, I'm then looking at breaking down the sessions. Okay, I've got maybe 20 to 26, 28 sessions, and I need to be able to help that person accumulate 30K across 4 different sessions, and have a certain number of accels, decels, and sprint efforts in the week. And I'll just reverse engineer that throughout the weeks using my GPS, and then build up the sessions back up against that. And one of the really cool things is the more information there is on like international and professional players, you can start to understand what the worst case scenarios are, from really short bouts of 1 minute training or 1 minute gameplay all the way up to like 80 or 90 minutes. And I'll just progressively expose athletes to more either extensive or intensive bouts of minutes of that type of training. And I'll design drills. So I'll give you an example. I'll design one drill called the square. And the square is just a square. It's no big deal. But up the out circumference of the square, there are different tasks and different intensities of running and skill-based work. So for example, one side of the 50 meters might be a tempo meter run at roughly 70 to 80%. The next side of the square might be an acute, sharp zigzag run followed by 2 curvilinear, shallower runs. The next one might be a jog recovery, and the next one might actually be a one-on-one in a slightly wider circumference, where it's like almost like competitive running, where you're running against somebody who's trying to jostle you out of position, whatever. And from there, you can design your session. You know roughly what you're going to get. You put your GPS on it, and all of a sudden you can start creating a library of drills, because you can go in and you can get the GPS metrics, and you know that the square V1, for example, gives you 3K. It gives you 400 meters of high speed running, which to me is above 7 meters per second, or 70% of that person. It gives you 2 sprint efforts. It gives you 60 accels and 45 decels, whatever. Okay, well, I know I've got that in the bank. So next week, when I know that I'm chipping away and progressing my numbers up towards this magical 30K that I've just made up, that actually I can start to manipulate my different drills that I've created a bank of, and really start to not just physically and from an energy systems perspective prepare the athlete, but select special drills that are relevant to their position and can help them develop their skill sets under fatigue as well. And I think if you do that really well and you do that right, I think it can have a massive impact on what that end stage looks like. And I think it's the difference of an athlete returning back. This does my head in, by the way. Like when athletes come back to training and they're like, oh, give it a couple of weeks, they're rusty. Like, I don't think there's any excuse for that. If you get the end stage right and you commit and you blend it with the performance staff and the coaches, you can have an athlete come back from, again, this is an ACL example, but like 6, 7, 8 months, whatever the period of time is, there's no excuse for that athlete to come back and just tear up if it's done right. And that end stage is done kind of similar to akin to the game sim strategy. So that would kind of be my experience.
Jason, lots of smiling, lots of nodding, lots of agreeing.
I agree a lot with what Alan had to say. I think the value that it's provided us, and again, having multiple years and multiple teams, this idea of drill libraries becomes really valuable, because what certain coaches like, what our men's soccer coach, what our women's lacrosse coach, like, what are some drills they're going to be exposed to throughout like a match week or a 2-match week. So then that gives us a better idea of, like, from a dosing standpoint, 6 months post, 7 months post, like the later stages, like you can then dose in certain drills or create a whole session just off of the historic information. We know generally, like, this is what a midfielder is going to get in this drill, or this is what a 9 is going to get in this drill. So that helps us just get the exposure from a high speed distance volume, sprint exposures, A-cell, D-cell exposures. So that's where, like, the GPS becomes really valuable. It gives us objective information to help us, like, better plan out that later stages when they're getting back onto the field. So yeah, I agree with everything that Nick said from that standpoint.
Nick, anything to chime in there with?
Yeah, sorry, Alan.
That was what Alan said. Yeah. No, I think these guys, they're the experts, and I think the key aspect there is just to work as an interdisciplinary team, really. I'm a physio, and I've got some knowledge of GPS metrics and field-based drills and things. But when you're working in an environment like I work in, you just draw on the knowledge and skills of those around you that can just really deliver it. You want to have an understanding, but you leave that to the guys that know exactly what they're doing and do it for their daily job. So yeah, if you work in that way, then you can get a really good outcome, as Alan said, and get people back who make an impact on their immediate performance when they return to play.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. So I've got a feeling that once we get one question and we get into the answer, we'll probably have a deluge, which is what normally happens. So we're going to leave 15 minutes. So we've got a couple of questions to go. And the next one is to Jason. It's a bit of a general one, not to kind of poke the bear a little bit, but most overhyped, getting Alan excited already on there. So overhyped, either data set or something that people hang their hat on a little bit too much.
Sure.
During rehab.
Rob, I'm gonna take it from an ACL perspective, because that's just the area that I know the most, or at least I think I know the most about. I would say probably the most overhyped data is anything related to, like, cross-sectional biomechanical assessments, whether it's like your LESS testing. So for those who aren't familiar, like the landing error scoring system, it's the use of it is well intended in that you can mass screen a bunch of athletes, video, record them. But the issue with it is that those often, like, isolated, standalone biomechanical assessments are so far removed from, like, the actual, like, injury MOIs that, and there's a lot of data that supports this, that they don't have any sort of predictability or any sort of, like, risk association with, like, an actual injury. I don't know, for those who are familiar, like, landing error scoring systems and some of those, like, surrogate assessments are, like, you're starting on a box that's 12 inches off the ground. You're jumping forward 50% of an athlete's height, and then you're doing, like, a drop vertical jump where you're jumping up as high as you can, and essentially screening from taking videos from the frontal plane, from the sagittal plane, and then ticking off whether there was valgus or whether there was an upright trunk position, things like that, where got a lot of hype just because some early papers in the 2000s were saying, valgus was the primary MOI, and so we need to screen for that. But a lot of follow-up analyses, whether it's 2D, whether it's 3D, haven't been able to replicate those findings. But still, that sort of thought process permeates a lot, especially in the ACL community, in terms of if we can screen for valgus, if we can remove valgus, like, we can, get our athletes from a high risk bucket to a low risk bucket. But there's just not evidence to really support that at all. So that's where I would say is I would say getting away from we need to get an athlete in doing a drop vertical jump, and then we're going to screen from there. is something that really needs to get moved away from, just because it doesn't replicate the actual demands of how athletes are injuring their ACL in sport. So that's my biggest thing in terms of like the overhype. And I think the line of thinking is starting to progress away from that, but I still see it used in practice, and where we're doing these less testing, or we're doing some sort of cross-sectional baseline screening. But there's not evidence. I've tried, I read through all these ACL papers all the time and have not really been able to see any conclusive evidence that these isolated tests have any sort of predictability. So that's tends to be where I go, which is where you can start to be creative as a practitioner and start getting into more some of these like field-based assessments. So like Dos Santos he published, I think it's like in 2018, 2019, like the cutting movement scoring system, which I think is a better representation of like the actual injury. But where I think you can be unique with that is that you can expose athletes to an anticipated cutting maneuver to both limbs, but then you can also integrate some unanticipatory conditions with that, and then screen that, and just get an idea of how like some of these sensory motor processes may lead to like actual like biomechanical like degradation of the lower limb. So it's things like that, of like trying to be creative with on-field assessments, as opposed to taking your athlete off the field and then testing them in a very like sterilized, pre-planned condition. Is just not really representative of the injury itself. So that's where I see is like the most overhyped. So hopefully we can start to move away from some of those traditional type of tests, but that tends to be where I go.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. We'll come to Alan in a minute. Nick, anything in your area that's you feel overhyped?
Overhyped. I was just going to contribute to what Jason was saying.
Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
The movement analysis stuff, the sort of has always been a bit of a black box, really, of things that promises but nothing really that delivers. Especially the naked eye, when you're looking at movement analysis, and even when you're using slow motion video capture, the coach's eye can pick things up. But if you're looking at real data, from my perspective, you've got to be having motion analysis with coda motion systems and things like that, and taking that out of the lab, as you were saying, to into field-based examples with unanticipated movement. And then when we start getting real numbers on that, then we can really sort of start to make better decisions. And there is some of that in the ACL rehab world, and Enda King does some great work in that area. But it still has a lot of way to go, but that does help. So yeah, I'm overhyped. Not my perspective really at the moment.
Cool, no problem. Al?
Nordics, Rob. Nordics.
Go on.
So no, like everybody loves a headline, don't they? So clearly, how strong your hamstrings are eccentrically and indication of fascicle length, all this stuff is important, right? Cool. But the amount of kids from an academy perspective that I see in private practice, but also like really high-end international players who are coming and saying, this is my third hamstring in a row, like I don't understand it, my Nordics through the roof. And I think there's quite a lot of there's still quite a lot of focus on that. And really having a high output is great, but having a high output and not understanding how somebody moves, utilizing that potential weapon, which can be a positive or a negative, is a really short-sighted way to look at whether you're ready to return to sprinting or whatever it is that the decision's been made. Really good example would be somebody who's produces high Nordic scores, but actually sits super low in their running style. They've got giant toe off distances. They're anteriorly tilted at the pelvis. They heel strike, they roll, they shin roll. They've got poor frontal plane pelvic control. All of this type of stuff, like that trumps having a good Nordic score. Like, it doesn't really matter how good your Nordic score is. In fact, maybe it's even detrimental to have a super high Nordic score and have really high output in your hamstrings if you can't actually put your feet in the right position and your pelvis in the right position so that you can operate at the correct length tension relationships to be efficient. And that's something I've seen a lot of, particularly over the last year. So yeah, that would be, I'm not bagging Nordics. I think they have their place, but I think utilizing Nordics to say somebody's good to run and good to sprint is fool's gold, in my opinion.
Nick?
I would just contribute. Yeah, I agree exactly what you're saying. Because to put too much emphasis on one metric is a big mistake, isn't it? And any decent practitioner is hopefully not going to do that. So the fact that Nordics, with the evidence it has behind it, is, you know, there seems to be some cases where that happens. But if you're looking at a multifactorial kind of problem that needs multifactorial solutions, yeah, definitely, you know, you're not, if someone's got good Nordics but everything else is rubbish, that's a problem, isn't it? So I think I agree completely. You know, you've got to look at, you know, lots of different metrics and then add into that the coach's eye of, you know, running mechanics and things like that as well, for sure.
Sorry, one more, Rob.
Go on,
What about IKD, isokinetic dynamometers, and like return to change of direction and running? Like that's another one you see. Like Enda published some great research that was based on footy players over in Ireland, and there was a certain score, and if you did that, there was a decreased risk of redoing your ACL, or getting injured. But that's a very concentric test, and actually, when we look at the position that people are commonly doing their knees, it's a lack of ability of being able to flex through the knee, through the hip, and dissipate forces. Actually, I think if people are hanging their hat on that, and I had a conversation literally just a couple of weeks ago about this, if that's another just one testing metric that you're hanging your hat on for, yep, he's strong or she's strong, let's go, then you're missing a trick, because you're only looking at one component of the muscular action. You've got to understand eccentrically how people dissipate force and generate force eccentrically, and coordinate the joints and the movement mechanics around being able to change direction and land, etc. So that would be potentially another one as well. Cool.
Last question before we get on to the listener questions. Nick, underhyped?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a hard question when you start to think about it, because I see value in, you know, lots of data. Underhyped, I think, I actually thought, you know, I was talking about ACLs and talking about hamstrings, but I was thinking about calves. And whilst there is quite a lot of data out there, and there's more, the calf project from Aspetar and the work, you know, some of the presentations I've seen from the Royal Ballet and things like that, about the kind of standards that you can apply to the calf complex in terms of rehab. I think, especially, I would say in football, it's probably an underloaded structure, in both in the normal kind of playing group, but also in the when you're coming back from an injury, and sort of underestimated in terms of what kind of capacities and strength you can push the calf complex to, especially when you look at data from Olympic athletes, from ballet, you know, in terms of the loading that people are doing. However, I would say you have to temper that to the sport that you're working in, and what the demands of that sport are, and what the athlete's training age of that part of their body is as well. So you're not going to take like for like and replicate completely. But I think there are some levels of calf strength, both isometrically and isotonically, and probably more so isotonically, that we could do a lot better in the rehab processes to just improve tissue tolerance and tissue capacity, so that, you know, we've got more chance of there being a successful outcome and not a re-injury. And that was in the calves. And then what I alluded to earlier in terms of hamstring rehab is that end phase, and that fast rate of force development, and the stretch shortening cycle mechanics that you want to demand of the hamstrings in the gym. But obviously the best test of that is your high speed running and your maximal sprinting. But to give it some adjuncts to improve it both in the gym and then out on the pitch. So, and it's a hard thing to quantify, and we talked about using a K meter as something and exploring that a bit more, but those sorts of things need to be made reliable, and they need to have the studies done on them to show, you know, that they've got good measurement error, etc., and they're useful tests to use in that process as well.
Amazing. Thanks, mate. Right, we've got 9 minutes, because I promised I will finish on the hour, which I 100% will stick to. So first one, and this is going to be probably 30-second to a minute answers, unfortunately. How do you monitor match minutes integration process? This is coming to you, I think, Jason. How do you determine match exposures from different injuries? Nick might, well, you all might want to weigh in, but let me come to you first, Jason.
Gotcha. I think I'm understanding the question. I think it's going back up. I think Well, it's understanding our coaching tendencies and coaching styles in terms of I guess from like a fitness perspective as well. Like, what are the aerobic demands of the athletes? What are going to be like the external load demands? And then really just taking back from historic information in terms of, what are they going to get exposed to during a match, or what are they going to get exposed to during multiple matches within a week? And then working backwards from there of like, okay, this is the high benchmark that this particular athlete needs to reach. I think if I'm understanding that question correctly, but yeah, that's how we do it.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. Right. Chris's question, this is coming to Alan, so I'll read it out. In regards to isometrics and training implementation, what is your progression during different stages of LCL rehab? At what point do you feel like implementing max intensity, ramp up contraction, or isometric focused at developing quick and powerful force output? You're on mute, Al.
Good. Longer duration work to begin with. So there's no reason why you can't start that as long as knee function, I'm assuming we're talking ACL, as long as knee function is good. Longer duration, more submaximal work, and just progressing the intensity. And if you look at like Natera's, he's a man when it comes to this type of stuff, but it's more pulsing work into more switching work into more catching work. I've never taken anybody that far. I've only ever taken anybody from longer duration, from like 20 seconds to 30 seconds, up to 10 seconds. And then my next progression would be 5 down to 2 to 1 seconds, and done for multiple reps over time. And they actually would usually be put in as primers rather than actual big training stimulus prior to on feet.
Cool. I know that was to Alan, but any additional input, Jason, Nick?
We're talking about using quasi-isometrics, and I mean, once they've, exactly as Alan says, once they've got a competency of being able to hold isometrics for a moderate level of load, not at your high load kind of below, like 5 second and below, but at your around 10 second kind of holds, that's when I would, and they've also a good competency of push or overcoming isometric as well. You might use devices like Kangatech or ForceFrame to quantify that. Then I would introduce switches and increase the amplitude of the switches, and then catches as well. And the same thing, increase the amplitude of the catches in terms of the technical execution of how you want them to do it. And then you can obviously add some load to that if they're showing all the competency throughout the kinetic chain in doing the exercise, but it might just be a bodyweight exercise.
Cool. Cheers, Nick. Jason, last chance? Nope. Cool. Back to you, Nick, from Jermaine. What stage phase do you decide to transition players from physio care to predominantly S&C?
This is an interesting question. I think, I always like to try and make it a total team approach from the start. We have regular rehab meetings to discuss the case. There's always things that rehabbers can be doing with S&Cs. If we're worried about a body part, but they can be doing all their other conditioning work, upper body conditioning work, or working on a contralateral limb, or working, in areas we think are safe. Ideally, the physio's in the gym with the S&C at the same time, and even when you're doing the hamstring rehab, again, it's a dual approach, and ideally you've got the two people there. If you're in a well-resourced, professional environment, that is ideal. Sometimes you might look after them for a few days at the start if they're a bit tentative, and then start to bring in the S&C for the specific hamstring rehab after a few days. But for me, it's very early, and then the running based stuff, the same thing. I'd prefer to have it as a dual approach, from the very start.
Cool. Thanks, mate. Right, we're firing through. This is what always happens. I think, we haven't got many questions through. We've got about 5 minutes, and then everyone piles in. Alan, when reverse engineering, do you use an average week or a maximal week?
So I'll look at, that's a quality question, both. I'll initially start at like an average week across, like, let's just call it a fullback for rugby or a winger. I'll look at the back three. I'll take an average week and try and push towards that. Once I attain that, then I'll start to take a couple of weeks at the back end, right at the tip of the sphere before they integrate back into training, and go after worst case weeks. That being said, if you're going to go that aggressive at the tip of the spear, you need to appreciate that you're probably going to have some kind of deload moving into training, which has like this massive cognitive stress and hormonal response that you probably, or some people don't account for, and actually they're physically fit but they're not mentally fit. So that's something to bear in mind as well.
Cool. Right, 3 minutes left. Nick, what does your calf, slightly off topic, but what does your calf loading look like in season in a typical week? I know you said it was an underloaded area.
Well, you know what? I've recently moved clubs, and the people responsible for this are the S&C department, and they actually have a really good approach to calf loading. And yeah, I wouldn't be able to sort of divulge too much around, you know, what they do. So unfortunately,
no problem. Understood. What is the ideal percentage deficit between two muscle groups, uninjured, injured, to ensure that a player can start field-based loading?
I think I can.
Jason, yeah, go for it.
Something to be careful of with this, because a lot with like limb symmetry, there's always like these thresholds of like got to meet 90%, got to meet 95%. Something to be really careful of, and this is like the value of baseline data, because I've seen it in like some of our lacrosse athletes, some of our other field sport athletes, where preseason, no injury, healthy athletes have significant like limb symmetry. And some of that, or limb asymmetry, I should say. And some of that could be like just the demands of the sport. Like an attack athlete in lacrosse is going to be a little bit asymmetrical just because of the demands of loading on one limb versus another. So I'd be pretty careful about giving like a benchmark value there unless you're fairly confident in your 90 or 95%. The other thing to be careful of too is that the more tests, so like standardized hop testing, right? In terms of like your 6 meter hop, your crossover, your triple hop for distance, things like that. The more and more of these tests that you bake in and try to meet some threshold value, the less and less likely that your athletes can be able to clear all of those 90 or 95% thresholds. So it's something to be really careful of when you're trying to deem like a limb symmetry or a deficit between uninjured and injured limbs. It's good to have a benchmark, but it's also really good to have it's really good to have baseline data, because you can see healthy athletes who don't get injured still have asymmetries present. So something to just be careful of before you start trying to hit a certain value there.
I'm going to stick with you, Jason. We've got one more slightly different to the others, which is why I want to go about it. From Connor, how do you go about building out collaboration with the MD team at the university? Setting in regards to RTP?
A lot of conversation, a lot of soft skills, a ton of just building rapport with our clinical staff, what they value, team to team, a lot of just soft skill, honestly, at that point. Not taking any research background, anything like that. Just really seeing what they value from a KPI standpoint, and then just building out an integrated process that goes from primarily medical to primary performance to primary coaching staff at the end of the day. Just really, it's taken me a couple of years, honestly, to get to a good spot, and that's just the reality.
Cool. Thanks, mate. Anything to add, Nick? No? Okay, cool. Right. We're bang on the dot, bang on the hour. As promised, Nick can get changed and go to his 5-a-side. So we're on time there. But Nick, Jason, Alan, thank you very much for giving up your time.